Welcome back to another edition. And I am delighted to have with me Joan Ryan, who is one of the, and I think it's fair to say, global experts on the Enneagram. Joan has been involved with the Enneagram for, would it be over 40 years?
30, 30, 32, something like
32
that.
years.
Yeah.
And uh, I thought it would be really interesting for us to uh, talk about the Enneagram types and how they do money. So, this is a conversation. Joan and I haven't talked about this previously, and we just want to see where it goes. But, Joan, why don't you just tee us up with the framework in which you'd like our conversation to be viewed?
Okay. Thanks, Rick. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you. I always appreciate the opportunity to talk to you. Um, I've been working with the Enneagram, as you know, for a really long time, both in business and organizational settings and with individuals. And for purposes of this conversation, I think we're going to talk more about individuals, but the patterns are the same. One really exciting thing that's happened for the Enneagram world and for me personally in the last couple of months is that a new book is coming out actually on November 19th, which is a collaboration between 5 scientists that ran over a period of 20 years. It started at an Enneagram training that I actually was present at, although I didn't participate. And the lead author on the book is Dan Siegel, who may be familiar to many of your listeners. Book is called Personality and Wholeness in Therapy, and it's written for clinicians. But basically what they've done is they've taken the narratives, the stories of people who know their Enneagram pattern, and there are thousands and thousands and thousands of these collected over the years, and used those as a data set to come up with a more scientific view of the Enneagram related to brain development and science and all of that. It's going to open the doors to a lot of research. The reason that it's relevant to our conversation today is that I had the opportunity to co-teach this, or I was the teaching assistant to Dan for this in August. And I could see how it is a big advancement to Enneagram knowledge and Enneagram information over what we've had, which is really good over all these years. So it's really exciting for somebody like me because it gives us a lot more usable ways to apply the information. The biggest thing that's relevant to our conversation today is that instead of 3 centers of intelligence, which is traditional Enneagram language, head, heart, and body, they have come up with 3 driving motivations that everybody has. And they line up to the same 3 centers. So for the what we would call the body types, 8, 9, and 1, they have identified the drive for agency. And what agency means is another phrase would be embodied empowerment. In other words, control over oneself. And for the heart types, the 2, 3, and 4 that we know, they've come up with the primary drive for bonding and relationship. And for the head types, 5, 6, and 7, as we know them, they've come up with a primary motivational drive for certainty. So it's convenient because it's ABC, agency, bonding, and certainty. And anyone who's familiar with Dan knows that Dan is a acronymaholic, as he says. But it's an easy way to think about this. Like everything else in the Enneagram, all three of these motivations are things that everyone has. But what this new work is fleshing out for us is that one of them is going to be a bit stronger in each individual. And then each of those three motivations then divide by some specific markers into three so that we have the 9 types. So it does align completely with the Enneagram. The other thing that I'll say is that we're moving towards, and I have been trying to adopt this, a slightly different language for the Enneagram, and that is that we're beginning to call them patterns, not types. And I really love this because pattern has the implication of a lot more workability and flexibility than type. I think that the motivation in the group that came together with Dan to write this book was that scientifically type is a very fixed thing. And there is no scientific evidence of something called a personality type. So seeing it as a pattern is much more consistent with science. But interestingly, it's much more consistent with the narratives because you and I both know that, well, with your type 1, there's so much difference between you and anyone else who relates to that pattern. So we like the breadth of it and the evolving nature of it. So that's the frame I'd like to use, if that's okay with you, because that's where I am in my work and development.
It's
Um,
going to be okay with me, Joan.
um, and I apologize for talking so long, but I needed to set the stage because I know that many of your listeners may be Enneagram literate, but this is new.
Yeah,
Uh,
this is sounds like really new and fresh. And as you went through the drives, they just made a lot of sense to me. Intuitive,
That's
intuitively.
it's really good. It's so funny when he first said agency. As you know, I'm a 9 pattern or lead with a 9 pattern on the Enneagram. And he said agency, and I kind of went, huh? And he said embodied, empowered. And I said, oh, like that thing I say all the time, don't tell me what to do. And he said, yes.
I absolutely related to that.
Yeah. Um, So with those three areas, what you and I might do, especially as we start this, is break our conversation into threes rather than nines at first, and we can fine tune it as we go along. But I think it might be easier to understand.
Right.
Okay.
So, should we start with the body type?
We can, and why don't you pick one of the questions that we had considered, one of the questions that you cover often, and let's see where we go.
Yeah, there's so many aspects of money. Uh, so maybe maybe it would be interesting to talk about. Oh, there's so many things to talk about.
I
Uh,
know, sorry.
we could we could kind of start with the money scripts, the beliefs about money
I
that a
think that
person.
makes a lot of sense because we know that everybody, again, like these motivations, everybody has a bit of this, although it might not, of each of them, even though it might not be a driving force. At least that's how I understand the money scripts. So that's pretty interesting.
There's four
Um,
categories of money scripts,
right.
uh, not four money scripts as uh, has kind of gotten out there into the stratosphere or
Right.
the um, internet. But there's money scripts, and we have hundreds of money scripts. Can somewhat like a pattern.
It's right. No, no, it really is. Um, one way to look at it is in your practice, or any financial advisor is going to use these money scripts how? Maybe that'll give us an entree.
Yeah. So there's money avoidance, which is get me away from money. Money's evil. Money's bad. The world would be a better place if there was no money. I don't want
Okay.
to. I don't want to think about it.
Okay.
A lot of professions fall into these money scripts. Therapists and healers and helpers tend to fall into the money avoidance category a lot. You have money worship, that more money is going to solve all my problems. More money is better. You
More
have
money
money,
will make me happier, something like that. Yeah.
money status,
Yeah.
where my self worth equals my net worth.
Okay.
Uh, that uh, yeah, my money gives me worth. So the more that I have, the more important that I am, the more income I have, the
Mm-hmm.
better place that I am.
Yeah.
And then the last one is money vigilance, which is I know where every dollar is going. A debt is bad. A spending isn't good. These folks tend not to have a whole lot of fun and tend to have a lot of anxiety around money. But interestingly enough, the money vigilant categories tend to have more money than the others. Now, not that
Really
they
interesting. Yeah.
have, but so the money vigilant category folks will tend to think, well, what's wrong with that? Isn't money vigilant the best category?
Okay. Yeah. Well, I mean, you're talking about belief systems, and you're talking about things that are learned and elaborated from our families and from our cultures and from our individual backgrounds. And as you're talking, it's interesting because I can see how all four of these would be handled slightly differently in each of the three centers.
Mhm.
So if I take them one by one, and please give me examples if you can as we go. Um, if I'm dealing with somebody whose primary motivator is agency and their own empowerment, and I look at money avoidance, um, the avoidance is going to fall into areas, I think, and we'd have to test this out, um, that where there's an idea that money somehow impinges on their control of themselves or their freedom. Okay. So there would be a determination, for example, that um, money isn't something that I want to deal with because because it can control me, something like that. As making a very, very broad generalization here.
Mhm.
I think kind of my own example through the nine pattern, where to me, I just don't want to deal with it. And I haven't gone deeply into why, but it's probably something that has to do with control. That if I pay too much attention to it, if I put too much importance on it, somehow that's going to control me in some way. And I don't like that. Um, my standard line about myself as pattern nine and others is you can ask me pretty much anything. Tell me I have to, you can just forget it. And it's kind of like that. If I lean over to the other, I'll lean first to your side, to the one pattern side. Um, and what I'm going to guess is that the reasons for the avoidance are going to have to do with internal decisions that there's about right and wrong with respect to money. And those are going to be individualized one person to the next, one pattern one to the next. But they're probably going to be more black and white than they would be with me as a 9. So again, my guess is it would fall under money means this, money doesn't mean that. Something would be one possibility. Money needs to be avoided because if I have it, it controls me in a way that I think is bad, perhaps. Or if I don't have it, it controls me in a way that I deem inappropriate or could go as far as unethical. Am I making sense?
I sense into that. Um, I am high money vigilant,
Well, yeah, that doesn't surprise me.
and I'm more so I think I can see with a 1, maybe a 1, if we were using the instincts, that was a social 1. Um, that the control makes sense, but when you said being controlled by not having it,
Mm-hmm.
that
That
resonated.
okay. And most of us, regardless of what personality pattern we fall into, um, are likely to avoid things that are unpleasant or deemed bad in some way. And of
Mm-hmm.
course, where we look at right and wrong and black and white in the 1 pattern so much, um, I think it would fit. In the in the 8 pattern, if we go over to the other side, um, I think it's more about avoiding allowing it to be too much of an issue. Um, what you see and again, I'm feeling my way here, so I hope this makes sense. What you see most often with money, with eights, at least in my experience and in the narratives I've collected, is a sort of freewheeling style with money. I do know eights who are very money vigilant, but it looks different than it would um, with the other patterns because it appears more free flowing and haphazard. And I think that's the avoidance piece, if that makes sense. They're avoiding being dependent on it, maybe. Avoiding being, as I said before, controlled by it. And therefore it kind of becomes a background issue.
Mm-hmm.
You do see the opposite of avoidance often with type 8s, where they will be quite spendthrift and quite free with it and then get brought up short. So that's the opposite of avoidance.
Yeah, when
There's a polarization there.
I think of maybe money status, the 8s are empire builders, generally speaking, aren't they?
Yeah, but it doesn't have to do with status. They don't actually, well, let me think.
How
Again, this
about?
is where in the new space, it would status if it meant not being controlled.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll go back to something that I say very often when I'm describing eights to people who aren't eight, who don't have the 8 pattern. Um, it looks to the rest of us like they're trying to control us. And what I know from talking to so many of them and working with so many of them is not that at all. It's that they do not want to be controlled. And so they will do almost anything. This is like embodied empowerment on steroids, okay? They will do almost anything to avoid anyone or anything controlling them in a way that they have not agreed to.
Mm.
So it's very much, the word control usually gets thrown around with other types, but in this instance, it's here. So that the status of empire builder would be, if I'm at the top, then nobody can approach me, can control me, can tell me what to do, something like that.
Right. Makes a lot of sense.
Mm. So avoidance would be probably relatively low, um, at least consciously, um, in that quadrant. Now, if we go to your example, which I think is a good one, if we go to the bonding triad, the 2, 3, 4, very, very often you see in terms of avoidance the behavior that you highlighted, the helper professional who has a terrible time charging appropriately for their work, which is a form of avoidance. The helping professional who's great at doing their job but terrible at running the business of their practice, and we've seen this a lot. And the avoidance, I think, is that you can't really be. Let me say this differently. The avoidance would have to do with an idea or a script that money somehow could impinge or damage relationship. Because if bonding is your primary motivation, you're going to be on the lookout for anything that could interrupt, injure, rupture, etc.
Makes
And I
sense.
think that's going to be true across 2, 3, and 4. It's a little more complicated in the 3 pattern, but and probably shows clearest in the 2 pattern where it's so focused on other people. But I think the way to look at it is it's avoided because it's sensed as dangerous to the bond. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Where that, and I don't know, I've never thought about this. If there's a higher percentage of two, say, as therapist than other types.
I'm not sure, and I don't think that we have the data on that. I do know that in order to have really the best groups of professionals, you have to have all the types participating. I mean, that's the diversity model of the Enneagram patterns. But it might be that money avoidant 2 pattern is very very commonly rooted in the same place. If I charge, I'm not actually helping, or I should be doing this, and therefore I shouldn't be paid for it. Sorry, I missed
Yeah,
the word. But I don't know that that necessarily means that there are more of them. That would just be how they factored it.
sure.
The avoidance for a 4, if I jump over to the other side here, again, would be in terms of the relationship and the connections that they're trying to deepen. You also probably would see avoidance because reliance on money could very easily be deemed inauthentic in terms of relationship. And that would be very much in the frame of the 4 pattern. That, my art is not, and I'm going to exaggerate here, my art is not about
Oh,
the
sure.
money that comes
Mhm.
from it. It is about the art and the emotion and the impact, something like that. And again, I'm exaggerating to make the point. So in terms of avoidance, that's where I would go. In the 3, if you see avoidance, it's going to somehow be connected to image, because the 3 type is making relationship by producing whatever it is that they do, for our approval or our recognition. And avoidance would only come in here if there was an internal determination that that image, that positive image, was injured by a reliance on the money involved. It's kind of counter to the normal descriptions of three that we see, because you do hear a lot about threes and money and status, particularly. We'll get to that. But avoidance could be the counter, and it would be tied up in the image that they had chosen consciously or unconsciously to project.
And it would be that money is a real negative image somehow.
Right. Somehow money is going to project an image that is negative to me,
Mm-hmm.
or will reflect negatively on me, something like that.
So if for the three pattern, if money would reflect an image that would be very positive,
Then you won't have the avoidance.
then there wouldn't be the avoidance. There may be status.
Very, very likely status. Yeah. Yeah. I think as we're talking, what I'm seeing is that we can't really go one by one with these because they're so intertwined. We're trying to, but you and I will always try. We know that. Let me just do the last one, and then maybe we'll shift it a little bit. For money avoidance, if we go to the head center or the certainty motivational center, the avoidance is going to come only if issues of money create uncertainty. And we could look through that lens. Now, the stereotype would be that the 6 and the 5 would be very careful with money because they're preparing against financial disaster. But I think that that's an unfair stereotype. I think that's too broad. Because what we know is, like I said about the ones, with the decision of what's right and what's wrong being individualized, the what's dangerous and what isn't dangerous in all three of the head types, the certainty types, is very individualized to the person. And I don't think that you can make generalizations there. But it would be something around, this creates problems, this creates money, creates danger, and therefore you'd see the avoidant behavior. That would be my guess.
Okay. That makes sense.
Okay. In the 7 pattern, we'd have the further piece that you might have avoidance if focus on money was seen in any way as limiting.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Because again, that's part of the way they get to certainty, is to keep options open, a large part. So we'd have that piece. And in the 5, probably you'd see some avoidance of maybe being public about money, maybe sharing about money because of the privacy concerns, which are part of the pattern for being certain and being safe.
Which might underscore maybe a 5 has more of a tendency to lead toward vigilance, which is very private.
Exactly.
About money.
Exactly.
We don't talk about my money.
We don't talk about it, and you don't ask about it because this is mine. And you mentioned the instincts before, and those, of course, are going to heighten or lessen these as we go. None of this is simple.
None is simple. Well, Joan, this has been an interesting segment, and we're going to continue this discussion next time. So thank you. I look forward to continuing this.
Good.